to direct this wonderful play, Sisters. And then this was my first full stage production directing debut. We held auditions and we cast the play back in February. And we were planning to hold 5 days of performances for middle schoolers. And that was going to be held May 18th through May 22nd. Then in March, COVID-19 hit, and that changed everything. So we were then limited to filming the play. So we decided to stage it. We were going to produce it in the garden house originally with the kids and the programs. Then when COVID hit, we had to change it. We were going to film it, and we had decided to move it to the actual Keeler home where Anna and Phillis lived. Then in June, the production was allowed to have a live audience. So we moved it to the garden house, staging wise, and we were able to stage it under social distancing, strict social distancing. That meant that it involved the audience as well as the actors.
So I think
as well as the production team that include the director, the videographer, etc. So moving it into the garden house under those constrictions and restrictions really changed the staging and the tone, the choreography, and I do believe it enhanced the production, the story behind the story. And I'll let Shirée share her side, but all these obstacles really brought us to a point of an even more rich production. I am so grateful. I have to tell you guys again how so grateful I am to our professional actors, Catherine Luciani, Valerie Brookshire, and Greg Cork. If one person had stepped out during that whole process, we may not have had the production. They stayed committed. And then the fabulous choreographer, Shirée Salem, who not only brought life to the poems, but also brought life to the brooms. Right, Shirée? And then, of course, David Trapasso, who stuck with us, the videographer, and my superstar, Hildy, who from the very beginning, back in 2017, had this concept in mind with the play. At the stage reading, right, Joanne? That this was going to be, after that play reading, Hildy expressed that she wanted a program with the kids, the middle schoolers, that would have a relationship and understand and have a program built around the story and the history of the Keeler and the story behind the sisters. So here we are celebrating it. I just can't thank you enough, the Keeler's team, the Keeler boards, and all the volunteers, and of course the audience. And here we are extending the Talkback, and it's extending the wealth of the production and the performance and the stories, the historical stories that were brought to life by Royal. That's my piece, and I'm sticking to it. I'm grateful for all of you guys.
Thank you, Kimberly.
You're
Thank
welcome.
You. So why don't we see now bring in the playwrights, and they can talk a little bit about how this play actually came to be, because it goes way back before 2020, obviously. This is like the second iteration of the play. So Royale and Joanne, if you could just talk a little bit about the process and also the challenges that you faced, because back when you wrote the play, you know, the Black Lives Matters movement had not really come to the fore yet. So maybe you could bring that, you know, that the contemporary relevance of the play.
Joanne, you want to go first? Please.
Okay, sure. So the impetus of the play came from a play that I devised with the docents at Keeler Tavern. I think it was 2012 or 2014, I can't remember. But it was called Women in the Shadows, and it was about the 5 women of Keeler Tavern over 500 years. And these two just kind of stuck with me because reading A View from the Bridge, which was our key source material, which was Anne-Marie Resseguie's diary. And they had been described to me as having a very sisterly relationship. And I wondered, how that would work, being that one was, yes, a free woman of color, but had a completely different completely different reality in life than the white woman of privilege. But they were, children together, and they did grow old together, and neither ever married. And so I don't know, it struck me as an intriguing relationship to investigate, a Black woman and a white woman. And in 2017, I wrote a grant to try and write the play, because I kept walking by Keeler Tavern, because I lived on Main Street at the time, and I would walk by and I would look up in the window and I would sort of imagine the two of them up there as children, with one 8 years old and one an infant, kind of trying to raise an infant. But I knew that I needed a woman of color to write with me, specifically a Black woman playwright to write it with me, if I was going to do the play justice, because I just didn't think I could make that kind of a leap on my own. And so I got this grant, and then I put out a call on the official Playwrights of Facebook, which has like 15,000 members or something, 15,000 of us official playwrights, right, Royal? And Royal was one of the people that answered, and she sent me some writing samples. And this was right before the 2016 election. So actually, I'm sorry, this is back in 2016. Then when I got the grant, and then the election happened, and Royal called me up or emailed me and was like, I need to write this play with you, because we had been talking a little bit about it. So we really began writing it in January of 2017. And I will say Black Lives Matter did already exist. They've been around, I think, since 2013. But they weren't as mainstream as they suddenly are as of like June of this year, where everyone understands what happened with George Floyd and everything. So, but there was a lot of, January 2017, there was, the Women's March, which some of my Black friends told me they didn't feel welcomed or invited to, although I did go to it, and there were a lot of, in New York City, there were a lot of Black women there. But one of my friends in particular, like, said she didn't feel like it was for her. So these are just all these kinds of issues. So Royal and I really wanted to investigate through these women, like, what's the deal with relationships between Black women and white women? That's mainly where it was. Like, these other issues, the wider issues came up, but it was really about investigating our relationships and where this sort of system has put them. The system of systematic racism and white privilege has kind of skewed what might be a more natural relationship. So we kind of investigated that through the women, these two women that lived 150 years ago, and we found their lives to be pretty relevant to ours today. And I'll let Royal take it from here.
Well, so I was very heavily laden with anxiety and trepidation because I didn't know exactly what to expect politically, socially, and creatively with Joanne. And and I knew that with the oncoming of the new administration and seeing all of these protests and voices being raised, et cetera, there was, like Joanne mentioned, there were some issues, internally with women in our own microcosm. So now not only that, but then we have that racial divide and that we are embarking on writing a play about two people who have something in common and two people who don't have a lot of things in common. So we had to address the race issue. And you know, I had just had my own experiences, and I am trying to wade through that and try not to be angry or anything. And I think that I can't remember how the conversation happened, but Joanne wrote me and said, it's okay, just let it out, don't be afraid. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I think I got a note too from a friend of mine, another writer friend, and I think was talking about our writing process, and she's like, you guys are tiptoeing around each other, you're being too easy.
Nice. Yes.
Yeah. And so then I think that's what prompted me to write you that. Yeah.
So it was like, okay. And I think what was really exciting and thrilling for me was that I was able to explore these untapped emotions, and I was able to write in, I was able to dialectically write as Phyllis's mother would have been uneducated, and with Phyllis being a young child, which her uneducated voice comes through, you know, at the end. But I was also able to write more poetically, and I just think the language, and I don't think I would have been able to do that alone without the prompting of the conversations between between Anna Marie and Phyllis, because I think the language in their adulthood was, you know, quite beautiful and everything like that. So, and there were these little nuances, implications that I just thought were just so thrilling. It was a personal pleasure to read these little things that people may not be cognizant of what is actually being said. But it was really, really hard as we progressed on with the play. We had gotten to the Wide Awakes March, and it came up in a conversation between Joanne and me. And I thought about, and you know, Frederick Douglass. Joanne had mentioned Frederick Douglass, I think, and I thought about incorporating that, and because I remember hearing the 4th of July speech a couple of years ago, and I'm like, oh no, this is it's way too strong. I was really nervous about that, and I was also nervous about the Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that kind of I felt something that I didn't like, but I was really glad that I was able to express it and release it and get that perspective out, because I don't think a lot of people would have thought about the other side, you know, the people who are impacted by Uncle Tom's Cabin, even though, you know, the counterculture who, you know, was trying to help abolish slavery and be very, very empathetic and supportive to the Black community, we're only hearing it from their perspective and not knowing what's going on internally with the people who are directly impacted by it. So it was truly, truly a labor of pure love A labor of love, yes. Thank you, I get wordy. Yeah, so it said that the Wide Awakes March, what was that, Hildy?
I need to unmute myself. Okay, now. Yeah, thanks both of you. I think that really, you know, listening to how you were describing it, because I was part of the process, but far away. You know, I would hear from Joanne and Royale. We still have yet to meet in person. You know, so,
Right.
So do we.
and
Right, exactly.
and back then it was all on Skype and it's not like Zoom. So the whole thing was, you know, a little on the clunky side, but it's really amazing how our relationship has grown now, you know, over and transcended these years now, you know, it's been
Years.
you know, it's really, yeah. So what I think would be interesting now is to, if we go now and talk a little bit about the history behind it, the historic setting of the play is set in the 1900s, you know, throughout the two women,
1800s.
1800s, sorry, the 19th century, 1800s. And these two women lived there for a long, long time. So what I'd like to do is we have, as a museum, you know, we go back, as you all know, or most of you know, we start interpreting, or our history goes back to the early colonial days, 1708 time frame. So the entire 1800s or 19th century are sort of square in the middle of our 3 centuries of history that we cover, right? And the way we went about this when Joanne first approached us, and Royale too, of course, the question was, well, what in your collections speaks to these two women, right? Because that's how you actually learned about who these two women were, right? So we have, let's start with, for Phillis, it's actually ironic that in our collections, we have an image, only one image for both women, and it's a photograph of Phillis DuBois, the Black woman. We do not have an image of Anna Marie Resseguie, who actually owned the place and ran it. You know, it was her family, right? And we have a couple of other small items in our collections. And I want to bring Catherine in here, Catherine Prescott. Catherine's our chief curator. And maybe she can just talk to a few of those very interesting items that we could provide the playwrights with, and then also the actors, because I want to give the actors a chance to speak as well, you know, interpreting, understanding how these women would have lived and what they actually, how their lives actually shaped up. So Catherine, if you could just give us a few more ideas of what our collections, you know, items, objects, artifacts, primary source documents were that we made available.
Yeah, actually for both Anna Marie and Phillis, we don't have a whole lot in our collection. Anna Marie, we have her words in the form of her journals that she kept for many years. We have the journals dating from 1851 to 67. Yeah, thankfully. 1851 to 1867. So that spans all of the Civil War years, plus some before and after. So we have her words, which is really important. And most of our information about life at the Keeler Tavern, or the Resseguie Hotel as it was at the time, comes from those journals. But like Hildy said, we don't have any imagery of Anna Marie. We know she sat for photographs. She writes about it in her journals, but we don't have those photographs. We have 2 portraits of Anna Marie's parents, Anna Keeler Resseguie and Abijah. And then we have this one photograph of Phillis DuBois. And we have a couple of other documentary things. We have a a business card of Phillis's, or calling card. We think it's probably a business card. It has her name on the front. And there's a letter that she received. And we have some of Anna Marie's correspondence as well, but that's pretty much the entire extent of the collection that we have at the museum, covering Anna Marie. And
we have some drawings she did.
yes, we have some drawings and sketches that she did as well, that are sort of tucked in with the journals.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, Catherine.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I never saw the letter to Phillis. Who was it from?
I'm trying to remember. It's not a name that comes up, like was familiar to me as coming up in other parts of our history. So I cannot remember. It's a really, really brief letter that it was sent around Christmas time, and it just wishes Phillis a Merry Christmas and thanks for, she sent them something, I think.
Do you remember from whom?
I don't. I have to look it up. I don't remember the name of the person. It's not one that's stuck with me.
So Catherine, one very interesting a bit of information we have is an interview that Abijah Resseguie, he was the father of Anna Marie Resseguie, he made, he did what the interview was in his later years, right? And he talks about the time when the young Phillis DuBois came to the family.
Yeah, Abijah it was near the end of his life. He did an interview with the Norwalk Hour, and he recalls and describes when Phillis came to the family. And the way he describes her is, what his words are, that she was a wild one, and it was I don't remember the exact words, but he basically says it was like breaking a colt. So it's some of that language around how, speaking of people of color like that, but he does mention that was how he recalls Phillis coming to them, which, we believe she was anywhere from 5 to 10 years old when she arrived in Ridgefield. So Melissa looked up the letter for us. Thank you, Melissa. So the letter is signed from friend Jane.
Jane?
Jane. Yeah.
It's in the chat, Joanne, and we just put it in.
Yeah, so it's in the chat.
Oh, okay.
So we don't know a lot about Phillis's early life either. We know she comes from Ulster County, probably around the New Paltz area. There were a lot of DuBois, or DuBois as they say, around there. And her date of birth is anywhere from 1820 to 1825. It shows up different times. But I do know, I was going through census records today, and she does show up on the 1830 census record as living in the Resseguie household. So we know she was in Ridgefield by 1830.
Which was when Anne Marie was born. So when Anna Marie was born. So Phillis was anywhere from 5 to 10 years old at that time.
And Catherine, the census records were also interesting because at one point they actually listed whether or not people could read or write.
So every census record up till the early 1900s actually recorded whether or not people could read or write. And every census record up until 1900 says Phillis can read and write. But for some reason, the 1900 census record marks down that Phillis cannot write. So, that's kind of an interesting, I don't know, was it the census taker was not,
I can make conjectures about
yeah,
that.
there's plenty of conjecture we can do about that. So, but it's an interesting thing, and if you just saw one census record, you get one kind of idea of Phillis.
But I think that, well, with most census records that I've seen, that included the enslaved population or the ownership. I mean, I hate to say that, but it also lists, maybe the first name and what they were sold for, what they were bought for, purchased for. So I think that just the omission of that, indicates that she was that she was fostered into that home because they gave her a first and last name, and they listed her as living with and with the address of the Resseguie.
Resseguie, yeah.
Yes. So I think that it gives her not the 3/5 human status that was typically attributed to people of color, just for ownership purposes. So she was considered a full domestic human being. Yes, she was a domestic, but she was a full person. She was listed and acknowledged as a full person.
Yeah, so in the census records, up until 1840, only heads of households were listed on the census, and then they would record how many free white males, free white females, free people, non-white, and then how many enslaved people in each household under that head of household name. So we do see. So I say she shows up on the 1830 census record. A free non-white female under the age of 10 shows up on the 1830 census record, which we can then, presume is Phillis, but we don't have her name on that census record. But going 1840 forward, she is listed as Phillis DuBois on the census as either, she's listed either as her occupation as either domestic or as servant on every census going up until 1900.
Yeah, thanks. This is it's really fascinating using the bits and pieces we can glean from history, right? To put together to put together this character. So I'd like to bring in Catherine and Valerie now, since you guys actually played Phillis DuBois and Anna-Marie Resseguie, and maybe you remember there's a scene about wages, okay, where the discussion is about whether or not should Phillis be paid a wage. So maybe the two of you could talk to that a little bit.
Val, do you want to go first?
You can go first. It's up to you.
Well, the scene that I can recall, so there's the scene in which, well, I guess in a couple of the scenes actually, it's like one of those talking points that just sort of keeps coming up within the play, that Phillis to Anna-Marie will sort of mention in like one of those heated moments of like, well, I'm not getting paid anything, am I, sort of a thing. And it happens in several scenes. So, and Anna-Marie's reaction at various points is sort of to brush it aside. Like, well, I don't own anything myself. So like, I can't do anything about it, sort of a thing. At least that's how, right, the play is interpreted, sort of a thing. Which is it's true though, because females still couldn't own, property at that point, and Anna Marie didn't have ownership of the tavern at that point. That wasn't until after her mother passed that she was able to then run and own the hotel, because her father didn't, and she didn't marry. So therefore, because she didn't marry, she didn't have a husband or a brother to take over. So therefore, she got lucky in that way. And yeah, otherwise, if she got married, her husband would have owned the hotel, and c'est la vie. Who knows if Phillis would have gotten wages? But so I don't know necessarily, because I don't want to like put out false information. So maybe if Hildy or Catherine can correct me on the exact dates, but I know, I think it's in the 50s. Maybe she's actually started giving Phillis wages before she actually owned the inn, after her mother passed in like 61 or something. And there was like, that's actually written in her journals. So there is
59.
a part, what was it, 59?
Yeah, and I think it is before her mother dies.
Yeah, just before her
Somehow.
mother died.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like there is a journal entry, and it's very brief. It's just like, started giving her Phillis wages, which is like, it makes me question, at least when I was acting that out, is like, especially when Valerie and I were talking about, that dichotomy as two actresses, but then also as the two characters, because there isn't a lot of information of like, well, why couldn't she give her wages up until that point? Is it because she was limited herself and wasn't getting wages herself? Like, and how do we act through that so we're not seeming like angry, super angry at each other that we can't overcome it, where it's still from this point of love, but then that it is also a point of tension. So, I mean, when I read the play and I got to that point where I was like, it's just this little note of started giving Phillis wages, I was like, woo, we did a little like high five sort of thing. But yeah, that's just kind of how it was. And I don't know, that's my take on it. Val, what were you when you were reading the play, or how would you interpret that?
I have to say that scene, that whole section of the play really frustrated me. It really did. Like, I loved it. It was great writing, and that's what it's supposed to do. It makes you feel for like where that person is coming from. So I did feel the frustration. Like, it helped me with my character development, because while I love my sister, like that's like something that's triggering. It's like you also don't kind of look at me as like a person who's deserving of being paid a wage. Like, it's modern day slavery. So that's why it frustrated me. Like, if I was around during that time, I would feel frustrated. It's like you're supposed to love me, and since you own, or one day will own this, and that's kind of what she says, like, you should pay me. I understand why your parents didn't pay me, but you should pay me because you love me. And I really do feel that way. So for me, it was a lot of frustration. It kind of equates to like what I feel now, even like just even being an actor now. There are a lot of actors who are not paid the wage of their male counterparts, or their white male or white female counterparts. There are a lot of actors who are not given their due just desserts, or the money that they deserve, or the awards that they deserve. So I feel the same way. It kind of like correlates to what we're feeling now. Also, even looking for acting jobs now, a lot of times they're awarded to people who are more fair-skinned than I am, or who are Caucasian. So it's I really did feel for Phillis. I know that she went through a lot more than what I have gone through. And for her to be like one of my ancestors, like, it's like she did pave the way for me. But yeah, I really did feel, I felt like I was kind of like imprisoned. So that's that's my take on it.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks to both of you. Shirée, when you wrote, you used The one prop, you know, like Kimberly was saying, are these brooms. So can you just elaborate a little bit about, you know, the brooms and how you integrated this very menial prop, you know, yet it became such an integral, like a backbone, you know, of the play.
Yeah, I thought that having, since that was incorporated in the script, that the brooms were very significant. We knew we had to use them for every single piece of choreography, and they all had to have, every piece of choreography had to have intense meaning with the use of that broom. And so I thought that was skillfully and beautifully done in the script. And so it made it easy. It just made it easy for me to come up with images. And then from there to then work with the actors to then carry out a piece. And so each time we had a section with choreography, I would match the feeling that I had listening to the actors speak the words of the characters, and then infuse it into the broom. And so I wish there was a way I could watch it back to point out, oh, this meant this for me and that meant that. But you know, every single piece had some sort of significance. In some cases, it was very literal, just the use of the broom sweeping it. And in a lot of cases, it was very abstract. There's a moment where Phillis is holding the broom up and then she points it directly at the audience as if it's pointing to you. It's like I'm sweeping on the ground, it has its use, but now I'm pointing it almost like a sword, like it's your turn. You know, this we are here now, we're still living this. It's a very direct message without having to say it. And so yeah, there was a lot of meaning behind it.
Kimberly, do you want to comment here?
Shirée is number one, she's fabulous. She's also a renowned director and playwright.
Kimberly,
she choreographed, you know, our relationship goes back in 2012. She
Kimberly,
choreographed my piece in my play.
Kimberly, your video audio is really bad.
It's coming in just static.
Okay. When I asked Shirée to come on board, I had the experience of working with Shirée. She is a renowned playwright and
Kimberly,
director.
sorry, your audio is really staticky right now.
So I can't speak. Ooh. My point was when the brooms, when I wanted to, when we worked together, we were on the same page of the brooms being characters as well. And at first we were going to have long brooms. And then the broom maker sent us short brooms.
That's not right. Kimberly, I'm very sorry. Do you just want to leave and come back? Because
leave and come back. Shirée, you can explain
yeah, I'll talk about that. Sure. So we intended to use these long stick brooms, and that's what I rehearsed with at home. I came up with some basic shapes. Normally, I love to have a creative, collective, collaborative process. So I didn't want to just wait completely for when we meet. I wanted to have something a little bit prepared, just a little bit, because of course I would feel out what they say and how they move to make the whole piece. But I practiced with these long brooms, and then Kimberly goes, "Oh, we got short brooms," and I was like, "What?" No, because these long brooms, in some cases, I was treating them like people. You know, it was this whole thing. And so when these short brooms came, I was just like, okay, what am I gonna do? Because I don't want them to be hunched over, you know, with the literal sweeping. But they actually worked really well. And these are authentic brooms that would have been made back in that era. So obviously somebody was using them, right? So we found good use for those brooms. They were beautiful. I loved them. They were lightweight. We were able to do a lot with them.
Yeah, that was a really great scene. I know. One of the most powerful scenes, of course, is when Frederick Douglass appears. Greg, do you want to speak to that? And
Thank you, Hildy. I just for the amount of time that I was in the play, I found it to be. I'm grateful that I was added to the play, and that scene was written. I'm just going over the speech, the entirety of the speech. I was bowled over by the amount of detail and how each argument that was either for allowing the system to continue as that, and the status quo, or and even or maybe too soon, or maybe gradations and change, how he attacked each one, or he addressed each one. But but in the beginning of the which seemed to be his style, in the beginning of the speech, he was self-effacing. He came across as humble. And you may have heard the term country dumb. It's in the movie Ray, but what it is, what it's saying, what it addresses is where you come across as being maybe a little bit unsophisticated, just so you can gain an advantage, or you can lure the other person or whoever the audience in. And he apologized for probably not being statesmanlike in the beginning of the speech, and that he hoped that he could deliver something that was not offensive. When I say not offensive, like I mean intelligent enough, not the material, but that maybe he didn't maybe he might split a verb or something to that effect. But he seemed to be apologizing for being not as educated as his audience was. And by the time you get to the end of the speech, you're just bowled over. You know what I mean? And I almost teared up at the beginning of the speech, because I could relate to what he was saying. And I just felt like that he's invited, and it's almost as if it was almost a joke, sort of like here is a guy who's an abolitionist. You want him to speak on what the 4th of July, the Independence Day, means to the American slave. I mean, it's almost, it's like, what is he going to say? What would you expect him to say? How would you address, and and would you would you create enemies, or would you create more interest and more allies in your deliverance? And so how he was able to do both, to both address it, not only that, but give I guess applaud in the speech the work and of the founding fathers, their efforts in creating the nation and the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and how beautiful it was, and it was and how glorious it was, and must have been, and how he could even understand how those who were against abolition, he could understand their point, and understand how they could celebrate, and how they could have all the fanfare and parades, and he could understand why why there was a celebration on your behalf. And then slowly but surely he would talk about in very great detail the auctions and the march south toward the auctions, and with such detail that you could feel it, you could see it, you could sense it in the air, the despair of the American slave. So it was eye-opening for me, and it was a learning process for me. And then again, some of the arguments that he was making are some of the arguments I've heard in the beginning of the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th.
Greg, you just turned yourself off. You just muted yourself.
That I did.
There we go.
And even now, at different periods from different speakers or writers, all the way up until this point. So it was a very great experience for me.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Is that allowed, Hildy?
Yes, of course, please.
Okay. So I was really, really, like I said, I was really nervous about throwing in the 4th of July speech in there. He was so eloquent in his trash talking. He said, it's just mere bombast. I mean, and then when he says, I challenge you, I dare you to compare brutality from, third world countries or, and you bring them back and you bring them here and collect them. And there is no other country in the world that's more brutal than these United States of America. So, I mean, given that time, given the period of time, what did you think that he may have, what do you think he may have thought about, or what do you think maybe he was in fear? Could his life have been threatened? Because he was, I've never heard anyone, what do they say now? When you're talking trash back and forth to one another, what's that?
Doing the dozens?
Okay, let's say that. But he tossed a few dozens at these people. So
he did.
We're talking smack.
Talking smack, yeah. So what do you think? Did you feel empowered, or did you feel anger, or did you feel hurt? More than empathy. I know you had to feel more than empathy. Something.
All of those things guide you, and including your audience, because while shock, we experience that on a daily basis, almost on right now. But shock is fine, but if the idea is to gain, my folks said you get a lot more flies with honey than you do
with vinegar,
something other with vinegar. So there was in the speech, in the entirety of the speech, there were both. There was praise along with chastisement. There was a balance in it, and there was a warmness in it, for you to say, okay, we connect. And then there was a shock where, okay, but this is the flip side of it. Yeah, it's economically feasible. I mean, it's economically fantastic for you, but it's spiritually devastating, physically devastating, and a moral stain upon, even the founding fathers recognized that. And they just sort of kicked the can and said, okay, you guys will figure that out. They even in different states wrote emancipation in, but it was maybe like after 20 years, after 30 years, or maybe the next generation. And then even when that happened, there would be, additions or changes would have happened made to it. So I'm thinking, and when you look at the totality of it, because he experienced slavery himself, so he knew firsthand. He knew firsthand. He also knew secondhand through the grapevine, the stories that he would get. And then moving around and being a speaker and having experienced being in the company of learned men, and having those conversations, I believe help him, made him a more accomplished speaker, a more accomplished addresser. Not just a firebrand that's hitting you upside the head with all of the facts and bludgeoning you with past deeds and what have you, but able to maneuver between shock and intellect, and to where you can, it's not as bitter. The medicine that you're receiving, the information that you're receiving, you can mull over it and not be shocked by it, or it's more so to spurring you into thinking and maybe move you a little bit left.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can-
If
Oh.
the audience, if anybody has a question, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Can I comment super quickly too on that?
Yes, of course.
Just
of
because
course.
what Greg was saying too, and especially Royal's question to him reminded me of this, and I'm definitely not the one to speak on it. So it's more me recollecting this and inviting the people that are you'll see when I get my thought out. But I'm so glad that we were able to that you guys did include that speech in there, Frederick Douglass. Even though it wasn't that he was actually in Ridgefield at the Wide Awakes March, but and we mentioned this earlier, even though you guys were working on the play, while the Black Lives Matter movement, was there, but it wasn't in the forefront as it is now. So being able to hear that speech, and especially with Greg as an actor, listen to him, iterate it, right, and put emotion behind it. And then this year, especially, and then for me personally, learning about for July 4th, but then also the that not being the day that everyone was free, the July 4th, 1776, and then learning about this year for me, Juneteenth. I hadn't learned about that before. That was not in my history classes growing up, or if it was maybe a sentence that I don't recall, but I feel like I would have recalled it. So, that's not something that I was taught. I learned about it this year. And that was something that was that's when, and even as Greg, you just said, people even after Juneteenth, in 63, I think, when, that's when, slaves were officially they were free people. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were, right? But how does that, adding that knowledge behind it of July 4th doesn't mean that everyone's free, especially in that Frederick Douglass speech. How did that, I'm not just saying for Greg, but for Royal, were you guys thinking of that when you were writing it, of that realization that not everyone is free at that point in time?
Oh, honey, I have had those and entertained those thoughts for years. But what I want to know is, has that ever been a consideration for you, or it never dawned on you until you had the script in your hand?
Well, that's the thing. I did not know about that history, and that's what I think is great, especially about the Keeler Tavern doing this right now. And, not just the Keeler Tavern, but other well-known historical points. I went to Williamsburg last year in September for the first time ever, and they had this whole initiative of finally telling more than just the white history. Because a lot of history in the textbooks, right, growing up, it does tend to be whitewashed, right? So this initiative that people are putting out now of that's not everyone's history of like, and being aware of that and spreading it and trying to get the whole picture. I think that's what's great. And that's why I'm like, yeah, I was so happy that when Hildy like said, hey, can we extend this talk back? So for me, the fact that I'm just learning, I feel ashamed, you know, not necessarily for myself, like, but I feel ashamed, like, of my school system that like I'm 27 years old and this was the first time that I'm hearing about Juneteenth, you know, and that's like a history it's always been there. So I think it was, you know, this year, yeah, when 4th of July came around, yes, I celebrated, but it definitely had a different meaning for sure. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah. So Catherine, I mean, that's great. That's exactly what, you know, we're trying to do, to really speak truth to history here, you know, and our history, 300 years, but thus far it's been told, you know, through a certain lens. And by now, you know, peeling back the layers and really finding, give voices to all the, you know, the past residents. But this is now where I'm going to bring in Melissa Houston. She's our Director of Education, because Melissa has used Sisters to Play, you know, to develop one of our really impactful middle school programs. And so Melissa, why don't you, because that's also speaks to our Act 3, and I know we're like, it's been a little more than we're almost an hour. So I understand if some of you guys need to, you know, sign off, but if we could just stay with us for another, you know, maybe 10 minutes, I would love to talk about, you know, Act 3, where do we go from here? So where's our agency here? What can we do to really move the needle, right? So Melissa, do you just want to say a few words about how we try to, you know, or are tackling it through our school programs?
Hear me, Hildy?
Yeah, you're good.
Yes. Okay, good. Just want to make sure. So hi, my name is Melissa Houston, not Zach Houston, though that's what my computer is saying I'm named. I'm the Director of Education at Keeler Tavern. I've been there just over 3 years now. And the first year I was there was the first year we decided to do Sisters as a school program. And so my challenge was taking that play, which was written for adults, and making it into a full day program where students not only saw the play, but also engaged with the information that was in the play. So the way that I developed the different stations on campus was not necessarily digging deep into the play itself, but looking at kind of the skills that students need to be able to understand history. So one of the stations that we had was a talk back with the actors, and Joanne, you were there that first year, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And the kids asked great questions, and we just really gave them the space. So after they watched the play, we gave them 5 minutes to just write down kind of quickly their top 3 questions, and then they divided out. So the first group that sat with the playwright and the actors got to ask their questions straight out the bat. But everybody else kind of circled around to different stations and came back. And we asked them to pair and share, meaning that they talk to another person to come up with the best question between the two of them. And it really, I was surprised, Joanne, I don't know if you felt the same, but I was surprised. And who else was there? Somebody else was there. Not Royal, you weren't there. Somebody, who else was there from the first, that produced the play this time?
Just Hildy, I think.
Just Hildy? Okay.
Yeah.
I was just surprised by the depth of the questions the kids asked. And we told them you can ask anything, like you can ask about the play, you can ask about the actors and actresses, you can ask about the information. And we left it kind of up to them, and they ran with it. Some kids did ask things like, what were the brooms? And did you like being in the play? And things like that. But a lot of kids also asked hard questions that I wasn't really expecting. And I think it's nice when you can offer space for kids to ask questions and they feel that they can. I remember one student asking the individual who played Phillis and Frederick Douglass, she said, or I think it was a young man, I don't remember correctly, but they said, when did you know you were Black? And obviously this was a white student asking that, but you know, Ridgefield's largely white. So who else could they ask about that? When do you know what your race is type situation? And I just thought it was a really unique experience. Our other stations, one was on historiography. So we took the some of the major historical events in the play and used them in different stations. So historiography was looking at the story of John Brown and looking at how we have told that story differently through time. He's been the hero, he's been the villain, he's been the hero, he's been the villain, and looking at historic textbooks and really examining that textbooks tell a viewpoint. And students hadn't really been challenged to look at their textbooks and say, oh, wait a minute, there's a point of view, there's a perspective coming out in my textbook. And so we looked at that story in textbooks, and then we also looked at, in the museum, the students got to interact with some of those primary sources that Catherine was mentioning. The letter, Phillis also had a calling card, the photograph, and kind of challenging the kids to think of how hard it is to write Black history, African-American history, the history of the enslaved, or any minority population when their stories haven't been captured. You know, conquering white people have written a whole bunch, and they've very much skewed our view of history. And if you're only left with these few things, for me, I never want the answer to be, we don't have enough to tell Phillis's story. Phillis's story is there, whether or not we have enough things to tell it. And so challenging the kids to say, you know, this is terrible, but if you died tomorrow and somebody walked into your bedroom, what story would they see in the things you owned? And that's basically all we have for Anna Marie or Phillis, is their house, the physical things that are there, a calling card, a couple letters, not much. And so getting the kids to think about the play kind of in these broader social studies skills or history skills, and trying to get them to understand that looking at race relations or gender issues is much more complex, and that it comes from a place. Like it's not just all of a sudden we're aware of it. It's been here this whole time. It's themes and history that we need to understand, that we need to pull out, and that, yeah, it's hard to do, but the kids were more than willing to engage with it. And one of the things for me that first year that was really exciting was we had a whole school come through. So we had was it 7th grade that year, I think? Every 7th grader from one school come through. So that was half the 7th graders in the town. And I was really excited to have both schools come last year when we were planning it, you know, through the winter. And then I was like, okay, in May, we're gonna have both middle schools. Imagine we're gonna have every single 7th grader see this play, think about these hard history themes. And we were really excited to think about what that would do to move things forward in Ridgefield. And then of course,
COVID.
So trying to translate that digitally was really hard. The two different schools took two very different approaches. And so we worked really hard to translate some of those activities digitally. We had one school really take advantage of all that and do everything we gave them. And we had one school offer it just as extra credit. And so we did not have a lot of kids participate, which was very disappointing for me. But I know that's just the nature of things. But moving forward, you know, we got good reflection on the resources that we made. We've got new thoughts about how, you know, to better frame the play for kids who have to sit and watch it pre-recorded. So I'm excited about how we continue to move this whole thing forward. And I've been taking notes. I'm very much a note taker. But so many of the things you've said, I've been trying to write down because they're just fantastic. And I'll pull them out in different ways as I continue to, you know, develop our resources for teaching this play. So
thanks, Melissa. And I think really the best part about working with kids is and spending time, you know, this is not just a 40-minute one lesson type of, you know, engagement, but it's a multi-hour or maybe multi-day, is that we're now teaching them how to think critically and hard, you know, about this hard history. And that they also understand that, wow, today we are talking about, I mean, one of the questions was, why are we still talking about this? I mean, think about it, everybody here. Why are we still talking? Why do we still have to talk about very same topics decade after decade, century after century, right? Whereas it is written in our founding documents, liberty and justice for all. When are we ever going to get there, right? So that is, and when we get kids engaged on that level, it is just really, I mean, Melissa gets really excited, as an educator. We all, we love doing that. And it's again also, having just the power of arts, the humanities, to really move the needle, right? That to me is really amazing.
Yeah, in our last station, they looked at reviews of Uncle Tom's Cabin, one written by Frederick Douglass, and then they were supposed to write their own op-ed about seeing the play. We didn't get to see those final documents, but I know one of the docents who was running that station had a table that was all young men at her table, and they were talking through these issues of gender and gender inequality. And one of the little boys, I shouldn't say little boys, they're junior hires. One of the students said, gosh, I guess I'm a feminist. And the docent just said, oh, go home and tell your mother. It's just, she said that was the highlight of her day. She was like, oh, go home and tell your mother.
I was thinking about this question last night, as Hildy, we talked about it a little bit, about the why is it still around. And I think because I grew up in the 70s and my generation was supposed to be the one that was past post-racism, but I think the thing we didn't conquer was the systemic racism. Like the fact that I grew up in Oakland, where Kamala did, and I was went in the same school system as her, where there was busing. Her like same age, and so I had an integrated school, very integrated, like all races. But the neighborhood was less so, and that's because of redlining and like all these things that I never heard of until probably 2016 or something, or was really aware of. Maybe I guess I might have been like abstractly aware that, gee, there's no people of color living in my neighborhood. But these systemic problems have never been addressed. And I think that's why we haven't conquered it.
Well, it would not be advantageous to a small population for systemic racism to no longer exist. It would not be advantageous because it's an advantage. It provides their wealth and it provides power, and and in doing that, then it requires a lot of psychological oppression and marginalization. So that's what Phillis addressed to Anna Marie. Why would these people willingly give up their slaves? These people have made them very wealthy, so that same behavior ideology has not just been inherited, but it's almost like it's been perpetuated and incorporated into the DNA of the power structure here. It'll take longer for it to be dismantled as it took to create it.
Hopefully not. Well, it's already taken longer, but I'm hoping now that we're a little more aware that that it is being dismantled.
I think that's one of the reasons why Keeler Tavern in our education programs has purposefully been trying to teach the story of the enslaved in our younger and younger programs, because it's like Raul said, it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take not necessarily your generation or my generation. It's going to take my kids you know, and so the earlier that we're able to teach students to talk about this and understand the history of this country, the whole history of this country, I think the better prepared we are to start dismantling things. But until we get to the point where we're willing to talk to, where white people are willing to talk to their white kids about Black history, it's not going to go anywhere. So I think that's one of the things for me that's really important. And Hildy and I have been talking about this, is making sure that even when we're doing digital programs, that doesn't get lost, that we don't stop the forward motion that we've got going, that we keep making sure that that's a priority, that that whole story is told.
But it's very important that the accurate story is told, not like the whitewashed version, you know? So I remember I was doing a presentation at a museum here to kids, you know, in the 4th, 5th, maybe 6th grade or something. And of course I was teaching about slavery, and I asked them, the entire group, if they thought that slaves were ignorant, you know, and a lot of them said no. And then one kid said, yeah, they were ignorant. Well, why were they ignorant? Well, because they were slow, they couldn't read, they didn't know how to speak, you know, and this was a 6th grade class. So this student had to learn that from somewhere.
Yeah.
I had something I'd like to add. Melissa and Hildy, I just want to really commend you, and I'm just so excited about what you're doing, and I love what you're teaching these children. A good part of my life, I also grew up in Wethersfield, Connecticut. No knock to Wethersfield, but it is a predominantly white town. Okay, I was maybe one of maybe 4 children of color, you know, in the school system at the time. Okay, so this was in the 90s, and I remember so Old Wethersfield has, you know, you can tour through Old Wethersfield and you learn about the people that lived there and the colonial times and all this stuff. And that was such a great experience, except they didn't talk about Black people in that experience, which built this country. Okay, so that was looking back at that is alarming, right? How do you leave out that big old piece of information? And that is so important. Yes, and Catherine put the Native Americans as well. Completely skipped over that. They just wanted to talk about the farmers and some of the children and how they went to school at the time, and they completely left out that piece of information. So without having that, you cannot tell the complete story about America. You can't talk about history here. These things have to be talked about, shown. And theater is one of the best, most beautiful ways to be able to do that, because it's like for a moment in time, you're living in it and you're feeling it. So I really just commend you for taking on this work. And being in a town that, you know, very similar to Wethersfield, you are able to do this, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Shirée. So what we have done, once we realized that, you know, we have these stories that have not been completely told, the board actually allocated funding and approved funding to commission what's called a psych history. So it's we commission an academic to research and write a complete to today's standard, you know, a history of our site, where all the lived experiences of all the people who live there will be accurately, truthfully, and completely portrayed, right? And that'll be like the founding document upon which all the interpretation that, you know, is following suit will be measured or will be, you know, reflected against. So we're very excited that as an institution, we are able to do this work, because, you know, I think everybody on the board, all the staff, we realize how important it is, you know, to really make a difference here. Yes, Elise?
I think you're the first in town also.
Okay. Well, we're the lucky ones because we have this great history. I mean, think about it. You know, there is like no other site in all of Connecticut that actually has 300 years of history that is still, you know, that is still intact and is there, so it's very fortunate that, we have this wonderful historic site.
I just,
Elise, you would like to say something?
yes. First of all, I'm so pleased that the story of Anna Marie and Phillis has been made into a play. I was one of the 5 women who transcribed the original journals and had them printed, and my husband did the graphics. And it was the first book that covered the 19th century in detail in Ridgefield. There's lots about the Revolutionary period and loads about Cass Gilbert, but practically nothing about the century that was in between. The other thing I want to say is I grew up in Manhattan in the 30s and went to a school that did have Black children as well as the rest of us. It was a very forward-looking school that I went to, and many of them went on to become well-known people. One of the boys was the son of Walter White, who's head of, I forget his position, but he was with the NAACP, and he was a couple of years ahead of my sister and I, and he played Abe Lincoln in the school play. And this was, at that period, this was very unusual. But the kids who came, they came from well-known families. And it was a fairly substantial private school. So it was a different era though. And it was very much more bigoted. Thank God we're not as bad as we used to be, but we got ways to go yet. But I'm so glad to see Anna Marie and Phillis surviving beyond the book, because I think it's an important story.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you. And thank you also for, taking the initiative to transcribe these journals. They are key.
It took us 7 years, and it also, my husband did all the graphics, and we got it printed. This was before computers. So if you made a typo, you had to retype the whole page. And it was a lot of work, but we became good friends. Unfortunately, 2 of the women have since died, and there's 3 of us left. And we enjoyed working on it. We got to know her. We got to know Phillis. It was an interesting experience, and they became part of our lives too.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise. So it's almost 8:30. And does anybody in the audience, does anybody have a question? Would you like to please raise your hand, put it in the chat? I'm just.
It looks like Adeline's raising her hand, but she's on mute.
Adeline, you need to unmute yourself.
Will you be performing Sisters once again in Ridgefield or elsewhere?
So that is a very good question. Thank you. So first of all, it's, with the COVID situation, who knows what's going to happen to live theater, right? We're all hoping that by next summer, fall, we'll be able to do more live theater again in person. I mean, we were really lucky in that we could, the way Kimberly directed it, it's a play with 3 actors, which is very conducive to social distancing, right? So had the play had 50 actors, there's no way we could have pulled this off, because the way Kimberly directed it, the actors were always more, Kimberly, right, more than like 12 feet apart at least, and right, you're muted. Kimberly, you're muted.
I was to give or take, we had about 6 feet with the dance sequence.
Okay,
6
yeah.
feet, we were upstairs.
But I just want to say, when Greg was speaking, even though I did not see the play, unfortunately, and I didn't hear the speech, but through his eyes, he painted a picture for me that I felt great emotion about this man and his courage and his strength and how his pain and what he accomplished was with his the person he was. And I feel, yes, we could study textbooks and this and that, but more and more performing sisters or having young people of all backgrounds interact like they're walking in each other's shoes and just being the golden rule, as you say, do unto others as you'd want others to do unto you. The simplicity of that sometimes is as important. I lived through times that you think you understand, you're a child, you're a younger person, but you really don't until, you know, when I went to grammar school, I had friends of different races, different backgrounds, and my mother worked with, her dearest friend became Dorothy Turner from work. And it's kind of like you're saying about, it was Emily and Dorothy, and they loved each other up until the end. At any rate, I feel so bad about many things, but I'm learning more now from all of a night like tonight. Or I went to the Jewish Center and they had the head of the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame, and they talked about a person that opened up a private school in Connecticut, probably in the 1800s. And when you talked about the Black people being taught as ignorant or slow, they weren't allowed to be taught. And there was a law in Hartford, Connecticut, that persecuted this woman opening up a school to a private school. And she actually had to shut down her school because they were all white rich people. And she was willing and wanted to teach a Black young woman. And there was a whole group of people, they were fighting to allow, these young people were going to be put in jail. This lady was going to be put in jail. The end result was she stopped having these people didn't want their children going to school. She opened up a school for all Black children at that time. And I can't think of her name, but it opened up my eyes to things that I didn't realize. Or even Harriet Tubman more recently, reading about her. Anyway, I'm feeling emotional. God bless everybody.
Thank you, Adeline. That was a very powerful addition to our evening, and I think a lot of us, feel like that. And it's really time, I feel, where we start to pay attention to all these layers of important stories that have not been told. Because ultimately, I always look at it, and we've been working for many years, and some of you know her, Katie McKnight. She interprets slavery, Black history for us. She currently works for the New York Historical Society. And she always said we need to celebrate the contribution of everyone, right? We need to celebrate the contribution that, Black America has made to this nation, because only once we understand that everybody's contribution really will allow us to reach our full potential. And until we look at it like that, embracing and saying, yes, we want more diversity, let's have everybody reach it. And then we can really be, what the Constitution so eloquently puts forth, right? So thank you all very much. I really enjoyed this. This was great. I was really nervous because this is the first one, and I have my allies, Kimberly and Greg and Catherine, Valerie, Shirée, Royale and Joanne, of course, here, you know, and when we thought this all through, and yesterday we had over an hour, and then Royale kept saying, oh, Hildy, this will be fine. You know, we have so much to talk about. So yes, Royale, you were right, you know, and I really thank you all for coming. We'll do, this is as we said, it's the kickoff of our Let's Talk Hard History series. We'll do it again on Zoom. You know, that seems to be a good medium now that we're all going to be sheltering at home again over the winter. So we hope to, you know, to be able to see you again and send us our ideas and comments. You know, let's keep this conversation going, you know, both ways. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for your time. And you all have a good night.
Thank you, Hildy.
And hope to see you soon.